According to the Greeks, the Cyclopes were the one-eyed offspring of the gods who were famed as gifted craftsmen and masons. The Greeks credited the giant Cyclops with building the megalithic construction found in Greece and throughout the Mediterranean. The Greek historian Pausanias recorded that the walls of Mycenae and Tiryns and Peloponnesus were built by the Cyclops in ages past. Clans of Cyclopes were rumored to inhabit the islands of the Mediterranean. In his epic poem, the Odyssey, Homer recounts the harrowing voyage of Odysseus, king of Ithaca. During his wanderings in the Mediterranean Sea, Odysseus and his crew enter a cave on the island of the Cyclops, where they encounter Polyphemus, a savage one-eyed giant. Polyphemus devours some of Odysseus's men before they put his eye out with a spear and escape the island. In the next chapter of the story, Odysseus and his men are carried in a storm to a place called Laestrygonia, which is a land inhabited by cannibalistic giants. The giants devour many of Odysseus's crew and destroy all but one of his ships.
The Odyssey is obviously a work of fiction, not to be taken literally. But like many of the legends composed by the ancient Greeks, it may be laced with historical fact. The mystery schools and fraternities of builders throughout history have utilized the insignia of the cycloptic eye in its many motifs to communicate knowledge originating from a celestial source. The single-orbed eye, open and watching, invokes the Watchers who descended to the earth in the antediluvian age, their forbidden knowledge and their hybrid offspring. The Cyclops is the embodiment of these concepts. But was the Cyclops more than an esoteric symbol to the ancients? Was it a real flesh and blood creature? In Sardinia, many believe it was, citing the small island of Sant'Antioco in the southernmost province, known as the Island of the Cyclops.
My name is Paolo Valdez. I was born in Sant'Antioco in 1944. When I was young, I explored a lot in the mountains. And so I saw many skeletons among the ruins and the old houses in the countryside. One day, when I was 8 years old, I was grazing oxen in the mountains. There was a nuraghe nearby, so I decided to go and explore it. I went inside of the nuraghe and discovered the giant skeleton of a man partially buried in the ground. When I looked at the skull, I noticed that he had only one eye socket in the middle of his forehead. Instead of two eyes, like a normal man, he only had one. He was very large. I could see his feet sticking out of the ground. He was much larger than a regular-sized man. And this happened in the area known as the Land of the Cyclops.
Sant'Antioco lends credence to the Greek stories of Cyclopes in the Mediterranean. Not only are there ancient folkloric accounts of the Cyclops inhabiting this region of Sardinia, there are also contemporary claims that the skeletal remains of cycloptic giants were unearthed some years ago in plain view of the townspeople before being secreted away with threats of violence if anyone dared speak of it. Many of the people we spoke with in Sant'Antioco affirmed that they had heard of the incident, but were unwilling to go on camera. Some even told us that the Cyclopes were exhumed right in the middle of town, where the megalithic remains of an archaeological excavation can still be seen. I had no way to confirm if these rumors were true, but what I can confirm is that highly secretive and restricted excavations are still taking place in Sant'Antioco today. We were able to film one such area where some believe that the graves of giants had been discovered and were being disentombed. Could it be that the legends of giants and cyclopes in Sardinia are true? Are their remains being exhumed in secret and then hidden away to protect the conventional narrative of history and the institutions that propagate it? The answer is self-evident for those who have seen the bones.
My name is Luigi Muscas. I am 53 years old, and I live in Poli Albarei. I've been immersed in the ancient history of the giants of Sardinia ever since I was a little boy. It was handed down to me by my relatives. The first skeleton I ever saw, the first mummy I ever saw, was on a rainy day in the countryside of Poli Albarei. I was out grazing my father's sheep in the fields near the ancient ruins, when suddenly it started to rain. I got caught in a violent thunderstorm. I looked for a shelter among the ruins to get out of the rain, and I found a small stone doorway leading into a megalithic tomb buried in a hillside. When I crawled inside of it, I found the body of a dead giant. He was huge, more than 10 feet long. He was mummified and well preserved. His skin was the same color as mine. He had all his teeth. None one of them was missing. I counted them. There were 32. I wasn't even surprised to find him there. It only confirmed what my relatives had always told me. We were the descendants of the giants. He had a huge head. His legs were this thick. And there was still skin covering the whole body. And even the tendons were still there. The tendons connecting to the fingers. I told my friend about it, and we came back together to play with the giant. We used to joke around with his fingers and make them move by pulling on the tendons in his arm. We had fun pretending he was still alive. We played with the giants for a couple of weeks, until they took him away.
This is one of the alleged tombs that giant bodies were discovered in. In fact, this whole side of this hill overlooking the town of Poli Albarei had tombs embedded into it. This particular tomb here is the tomb in which Luigi saw his first giant when he was a boy. Luigi says the head of the giant was here, facing the sun, facing the east, and the feet of the giant went underneath. This used to be a structure with a roof, a sarcophagus, and it's been filled in with dirt. So in other words, what we're standing on now was not the bottom of the tomb by any means. It went much further down, and it was large enough for Luigi and his friend to get down into it when they were children. So it has been purposely filled in with dirt, so you can no longer access whatever's inside of this tomb. We're going to measure this just so that you can see that it also is certainly large enough to fit the body of a giant. Remembering that we're basically measuring the top of what was the roof of this sarcophagus. So it doesn't necessarily give us the accurate measurement. It would have been larger within, but we can show that definitely it was large enough to accommodate the body that Luigi found. From where the head of the giant would have been positioned to this rock face, which is not the bottom of the sarcophagus, but the top of the sarcophagus. Luigi tells us that the feet of this particular giant extended down underneath this stone, which was the roof. We have a measurement of well over 11 feet.
As you can clearly see, this is all that remains. These ruins were left because I stopped the excavators. They wanted to plant trees, like those trees over there. They wanted to destroy everything. The tombs, the pyramid, the other step pyramid over there, and part of the nuraghi. They wanted to destroy all of this, to plant trees and provide work for the youth. But it was just an excuse to cover up this history. So that day I was eating, and I felt compelled to leave my house and rush up here. I didn't know why I was coming, but it happens like that for me. When I feel I have to go, I go. And so I drove here with my car. I was speeding like crazy to get up here. When I got here, I stopped the excavators who were destroying everything. I told them, stop, and they stopped. They were under specific orders from the authorities to get rid of everything, because these are the last ruins of this lost city, of this history, and they wanted to eliminate it so that nothing would be left.
I've seen many times now the attempt by different governments, different organizations to cover up certain artifacts or certain megalithic sites by simply obscuring the view, in most cases by planting trees, either around or in front of the objects that they don't really want people to be looking at. In this case, Luigi can personally testify to the fact that these trees, right around this area where these tombs of the giants are, were purposely planted in rows with the expressed objective to hide what is here from the view of the villages below. Basically, it's a way of saying there's nothing to see here, don't pay attention to this, and certainly no tourists come to this particular spot. Nobody's here, ever. In fact, there's fences all around here that are broken down to keep people out. These also used to be tombs equivalent to the ones we've already filmed. There are at least 2 or 3 here in this row. So there were dozens of tombs right in this area, right along this hill. And right in front of these tombs, trees planted in rows with no other purpose, ostensibly, except to block the view of these tombs. I spent a considerable amount of time on that hillside overlooking the village of Pagliarbare, inspecting what remained of the megalithic edifices that once stood there before they were intentionally broken to pieces by heavy machinery. One can clearly see that the debris of the demolition was simply scattered over the fields. It is evident that at one time in the distant past, dozens of tombs were constructed in an east-west orientation between 2 pyramidal structures and a nuraghe tower. What I find very intriguing is that the pyramids seem to have been covered in quartz. A layer of crystallized quartz is still plastered on the exterior of many of the megalithic blocks. The presence of such regal monuments indicates that the deceased entombed between them must have been men of renown. We also measured several ruined graves that were configured in a north-south orientation in front of the tombs. They were all over 11 feet long and certainly spacious enough to accommodate the dead bodies of 10-foot-tall giants, consistent with Luigi's descriptions of the mummified corpses that once occupied them.
It's very likely, so we're told, that the bodies that were placed in these particular tombs, the giant bodies, the mummified bodies, are in fact still here. We're fairly confident that if we were to bring shovels up here and start digging, we would probably be arrested. And definitely somebody would come and stop us, because we get the feeling that we're under surveillance, or have been under surveillance since we came into this area of Sardinia.
When I told our story, they threatened me. They said they were going to shoot me and my family. We are continuously monitored.
While we were filming around Pagliarbare, one of the town officials pulled up in his car and was watching us from a distance with a look of consternation on his face. He made a cell phone call before driving away. As soon as we got up to the hillside where the tombs are, a helicopter appeared on the horizon and hovered around the area until we left.
Here in this country, the legends of the giants still get passed down. The legend of the lost civilization. but by now the stories are almost forgotten, because many of the elderly in the country have died, and the young people don't really care about our history. So, many of the old people that knew about the giants are dead. Only a few remember the stories, like my mother and Uncle Alfredo.
My name is Alfredo Garau. I am 76 years old. I live here in Pauli-Arbarei. I was 17 or 18 years old when I started driving tractors. And while plowing in the fields, we would turn up these bones, me and my older brother. And we would say, "Why are these bones so large? They are not from cows or oxen." And so we would look at them and wonder, who could these bones belong to? We knew they were human. They looked like the bones of men. And so we didn't have the foresight to take any of them home with us. We would just leave them lying there, and there were many. I even found an ancient coin among them, but I don't have it anymore. They took it away from me. Also, I have seen a place in the countryside where someone built a fence for sheep. And there were piles and piles of bones gathered there. You know how they tie bundles of wheat? They put them in piles like that. There were a lot of them, a lot.
My name is Filomena Cadau. I was born in Pauli-Arbarei on the 28th of October, 1939. We used to ask my father questions when we were plowing the soil because we would find pieces of femurs or teeth as big as a finger. So we would ask, what are these? Do they belong to animals? And he would say, no, those were big men that used to live in the past. My father used to always say that. The countryside of Pauli-Arbarei was full of these skeletons.
In Kokiakas, there was a tomb that was 11.5 feet long. We measured it several times with Luigi, and there was a skeleton inside of it. We measured the tibia and the femur of the skeleton. It was 5.5 feet long, and that one was documented.
As I would walk behind the plow, every once in a while, some pieces of bones would pop up. We were very close to the nuraghe of Senesi. There were many tombs there, and they were arranged in a circle, and they were enormously long. And my father would always explain to me that some time ago, this land was inhabited by the giants.
When I showed my grandfather the mummy, he told me the whole story about them, how they built the nuraghe, how they built the tombs, the sculptures, everything. Because he inherited the stories from his ancestors. This great civilization was, let's say, was pervasive all over the earth, because we find the same things with the Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Mayan civilization, the Inca, the Aztec. In all of the civilizations of the world, there are strong links with the civilization of the giants of Sardinia, because they dominated the entire world. And all of the megaliths in China, in Japan, in Asia, all over the earth, it all comes from the same civilization. Ultimately, this civilization, having rebelled against God, who created everything, was punished and destroyed. This destruction happened in one day and one night, with the overheating of the atmosphere, earthquakes, and with the water that came from the sea and buried everything, all of Sardinia. This was a universal flood. It wasn't only in Sardinia, so everything was buried underground. Why are the nuraghe buried beneath the soil? because the water came and buried them. It caught everyone by surprise. So everything they had is still buried inside the nuraghe. The official story does not tell the truth. But if anyone wants to dig, they can still unearth this history inside the nuraghe, the pyramids and the temples. The seeds to replant this great civilization are still there.
So we are in Barumini, at the archaeological site of Sunuragi, which is a UNESCO site. It is one of the largest nuraghe complex of the island, and it's been excavated deeply in the 50s. Just before it was excavated and investigated, the site looked like one of the many hills which characterize the scenery and the landscape of this interior of the island, of the region called Marmilla. Underneath the mud, the earth of these hills, there are other archaeological sites. In all likelihood, nuraghe, these megalithic buildings of the island.
Many of the largest megalithic edifices on Earth are still buried beneath a layer of sediment that was distributed over the surface of the planet during the Great Flood. As a result, the most massive and mind-blowing antediluvian constructions have yet to be unearthed or even acknowledged because their unbelievable size simply defies the conventional narrative of history. All over Sardinia, there are large mounds of earth covered in stone rubble. Beneath many of these mounds, the ruins of undiscovered nuraghe towers or other megalithic edifices from the antediluvian age are hiding in plain sight. The largest of the nuraghe towers in Sardinia were once thought to be nothing more than natural formations of the landscape before they were unearthed. In the midst of the region known in Sardinian legend as the Lost City, which was said to be the capital of a once great seafaring empire ruled by 10 giant kings, an isolated conical hill rises high into the air. The ruins of a medieval fortress crown the summit, but pale in comparison to the enormous stone edifice rivaling the Great Pyramid of Giza, likely hiding beneath it. The skeptics refer to it as a conical hill, but the elders of the local villages call it an ancient pyramid. Could Sardinia have been the epicenter of a once mighty antediluvian empire? It would have undoubtedly required the resources of a great people to build the tens of thousands of megalithic towers that were once present on the island. For many of its residents, legends of giants in Sardinia are much more tangible than fairy tales or bedtime stories. They represent a true history authenticated by the bones, exhumed from the earth with their own hands. They also represent a forbidden history because many of those bones were confiscated by the authorities as soon as they came out of the ground.
Sardinia of contemporary times is a comparative case study of the United States at the turn of the 20th century as it relates to the confiscation and cover-up of artifacts pertaining to alternative anthropological and historical narratives, especially concerning the existence of giants. During a period of modernization in the post-World War II era, new foundations were being laid for residential and commercial infrastructure in the villages, and tractors were replacing horse-drawn plows in the fields. Consequently, many ancient graves were inadvertently turned up by the construction workers and farmers using industrial machinery. The bodies and bones of giants were surfacing all over the island. Rumors of giant skeletons and mummies were spreading throughout the villages. And just like in the United States during the late 1800s, the authorities were showing up to confiscate the evidence for purported archaeological purposes. But instead of representatives from the Smithsonian Institution, in Sardinia, government agents from the capital city of Cagliari and Catholic priests, in some cases from the Vatican in Rome, were dispatched to seize the bones of the disentombed giants and secret them away to unknown repositories.
There is a significant Vatican presence in Sardinia, especially in and around areas of archaeological interest. In fact, a domed church just so happens to be located right at the base of the solitary pyramidal mound sticking out of the landscape like a sore thumb. The church is the closest structure in proximity to the mound on the outskirts of the local village. Judging from our experience in other parts of the world, I highly doubt that the location of this church was an afterthought.
When we were young, we used to go to church, and we would tell the priests about what we saw. We would ask them, "What are these huge skeletons? Who are these big people?" And they would tell us not to look at them, because they were devils. I would tell my grandfather, "Grandpa, the priest told me that these are devils." And he would tell me, "He is the devil, not the giants." So whenever we would find these things, they would tell us to leave them alone because they were devils. In fact, they burned the bones, but they were too large to be completely consumed, so they would gather them in piles, and then big trucks would come and take them away because we didn't really care. We didn't know where they took them, but when they came with the trucks, they would load them with the bones and haul them away. But we don't know where they went, and since there were thousands and thousands of them, they probably burned them in a foundry or something, because where else could they put them? So they would make these skeletons disappear. And the church was always involved, because they didn't want people talking. They didn't want people talking about it. But there's something else. They always built their churches all over the world, right on top of archaeological sites. Why do they build them there? Because where these archaeological sites have been constructed, there are ancestral connections. They are directly coordinated with the heavens. So the ancient people that constructed them were directly tied into the heavens, into the universe. And the church knew it. The church has appropriated this history. They built all their churches and ecclesiastical monuments over the places of worship of this civilization.
We're in Dolianova, in the church of San Pantaleo. This cathedral is found in the middle of an archaeological area. As you can see from the floor here, there are steps which lead downstairs where there's a large necropolis and many other finds. This church is particularly significant because later, around the 12th and 14th century AD, frescoes were added along the apsis and also on the side of the naves. And there are some very important symbols, like the tree of life and also the evangelist and the angels who mixed with the humans. And all these esoteric symbols you see around this church are quite uncommon.
It is definitely one of the most bizarre churches I've ever been in. There are a lot of esoteric symbols inside of this church and some very peculiar architecture. This is another example of a Catholic cathedral being built right on top of something else.
Oh, yes.
Obviously, there was some kind of other temple here because there's two different kinds of architecture, at least two different kinds of architecture represented here.
Early Christian.
The early Christian, but then there's something much older here.
Yeah, underneath, probably ruins and remains of temples. And some of these parts were recycled and reused inside the church. As you can see, even these pillars, you can tell they're much more ancient than the church itself.
So it's very possible that only the Catholic Church really knows what's under this particular archaeological area.
Yeah.
What's actually in the catacombs, maybe what kind of skeletal remains are down there or have been extracted from beneath this chapel.
Yeah.
This is an old baptismal pool here below the altar of this little cathedral. And it's obvious to us that we have some newer construction, such as this pillar. But there's a lot of older stuff down here too that belonged to whatever temple or necropolis or whatever was here before the Catholic Church decided to build a cathedral over it. This wall is obviously blocking another chamber, another underground chamber beneath the cathedral. And we can see that there's actually an arch here. So there was something else here, obviously. This was an archway, which means that this floor was probably lower, unless this is some sort of a sewer, who knows. But one thing is for sure, there's another cavern back there. And these rocks have been placed there purposely to block entry, and this wall has been built to block entry. But my guess is there's probably another entry somewhere else, maybe around outside of the church, or somewhere in the vicinity to access whatever's below this location. So this is proof positive that when we say Catholic cathedrals are actually erected on top of ancient pagan constructions and catacombs and underground passageways, we're telling the truth.
We were not looking for Vatican conspiracies in Sardinia. But after my visit to the bizarre cathedral of San Pantaleon, it became quite clear that many of the most profound archaeological mysteries on the island had been sequestered long ago beneath the real estate of the Holy See. During a preliminary trip to Sardinia in 2015, we met with multiple individuals who told us that an ongoing cover-up concerning the bones of giants had been occurring on the island for many years, and that the Vatican was at the center of it. Some of these individuals cited a particular excavation conducted in the early 80s beneath the small church of Santa Anastasia in the village of Sardara. One of the men involved in the excavation during its latter years agreed to a brief rendezvous in the streets of Sardara.
Concerning the skeletons of giants, I worked in Santa Anastasia, where there is a neuralgic archaeological site. I personally excavated 2 skeletons that were more than 10 feet tall. We placed them in the churchyard and left them there because they had to be inspected by the authorities from Cagliari, by Dr. Ugas and other people. I worked there in 1982, 83 and 84. The skeletons were taken to the municipal archive and now they're gone. They disappeared, and they made me shut my mouth about it. I took Luigi to the church of Santa Anastasia to show him where I found the skeleton. The outline of the skeleton was still visible in the tomb. But they make you shut your mouth about it. They don't let you say anything. I'm not crazy. I've seen these things. I personally handled the bones. The femur was this high. This part was like this high. They were like us, just taller, over 10 feet tall or so, with big heads, big hands, big feet, long femurs. Their hips were bigger. They were proportionally double our size. For example, I'm 5 feet tall. They were 10 feet tall. You understand?
Does the government of Sardinia know that there used to be a race of giants living on this island, in your opinion?
Le autorità in Sardegna lo sanno dell'esistenza di una razza di giganti che vive qui?
Yes, in my opinion, they know. I think they know, and they are covering everything up. When I worked for the municipality of Sardara, I worked there for 1 year, for 6 months, and then for another 6 months the following year. I found skeletons, I found artifacts, bronze statues, discovered the first nails made of bronze. And those were taken too, but I was able to get them back. But the skeletons of the giants are gone. Nobody knows what happened to them. In my opinion, the authorities from Cagliari are behind this. The church is also involved. Something is going on. The Masons are always involved. I think it's the Masons, the Illuminati, whoever they are. The Masons have the cash, so they hide everything. We have to just keep our mouths shut, you understand? So if I talk about it, or he talks about it, or someone else, we are just a few. They think we are crazy.
My name is Giuseppe Pulici. I was born in Sardara. I live in Sardara. And I worked on the excavations of Sant'Anastasia in Sardara. I was hired by the municipality of Sardara in 1979, 80, and 81. I was paid by the municipality of Sardara, and I used to work there for 3 or 4 months at a time, and I found skeletons of various dimensions. Some of the skeletons were giants. Their skulls were about 3 or 4 times bigger than ours. We measured the fingers on their hands. They were 6 to 8 inches long, and their legs were extremely long compared to ours. We always carried the bones and the artifacts we found into the church and placed them on the large table. We worked in the early morning until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and after we left, someone would come and take everything away. All the bones we found there belonged to humans. We found many of them scattered around, which had decomposed or fallen apart over time. The bones were everywhere. I found a really big skull that was almost totally intact. It just had a small crack on one side, and part of the spinal cord was still attached to it. In fact, my wife was out there with me that day. She helped me carry that big skull into the church. We placed it on the table with the rest of the artifacts. When we came back the next day, it was gone. Besides all of this, I also found some lens tips, some earrings, some pearls, some bronze statues, some bars made of bronze, earrings, and many other things. There were also huge plates and cups similar to what we use for coffee, for example. But they were enormous. They were not like the cups we use today. I mean, they were cups, but they were enormous. On one occasion, we opened a chamber buried in the nuraghe and discovered the skeleton of a giant that was seated at the table with an enormous plate in front of him. There were even some oyster, mussel, and clam shells that he had been eating still left on the plate. We carried the skeleton out of the nuraghe and placed it on the table in the church. And like usual, someone came during the night and took it away. We were finding so many bones